At my mother's birthday, I wasn't expecting anything unusual. The room felt routine, filled with the kind of noise and motion that belonged to every family gathering I'd ever attended. There were the predictable pastel decorations, paper napkins, and the fruit tart my mom made every time she wanted to appear casual but above others. My father was reliving old stories about how hard things had been, making sure everyone remembered his hardships. My sister had shown up with her kids and balloons, already pretending the morning's chaos hadn't happened. There was no sign of anything brewing underneath the surface. It was the sort of day you stop analyzing because it's just another brick in the wall of your life. Freya had wandered off somewhere, probably reading or lost in her thoughts. I went through the motions, half smiling, keeping my voice light, avoiding any conversation that could become complicated. I was practiced in this, smoothing things over, never mentioning what might break the fragile peace. There was wine, cheap but enough, music playing low, a few laughs, some complaints about work or money, nothing sharp or dangerous. I drifted through it, thinking maybe this was how family was supposed to be. For a moment, I even allowed myself to think things might be improving, that maybe we had reached some small détente after years of drama. It wasn't until I heard my phone that I felt anything shift. The screen lit up with my daughter's name. She was 10, not someone to call unless she needed something. I looked around, didn't see her, thought maybe she was upstairs or in the yard. When I picked up, her voice was shaking. She told me to leave, not a request, not a joke. Her voice was unsteady, almost scared. I didn't think, I just walked out, left everything behind, the half-eaten tart, my parents' conversation, my shoes, my coat. I moved like I wasn't inside my own body, like my mind had switched to some emergency protocol. The air outside was ordinary, warm, slightly sweet from cut grass, but in that moment, everything was changed. Freya was waiting in the driveway, backpack on her shoulder, staring at me with eyes that looked much older than 10. She didn't cry, didn't speak. I reached her, still searching her face for clues, but she was closed off, guarded, holding her bag like a shield. She told me she didn't want to talk here, asked to leave. I unlocked the car and we left, quietly, without anyone noticing. I could feel my mind cycling through possibilities. Had someone hurt her? Was there a threat in the house? Did she overhear something that scared her? The ride was silent, heavy with questions I couldn't voice. We parked near an old garden center. I waited, my hands shaking, but she said only that she never wanted to go back to my parents' house again. She said it flat, not angry or dramatic, just with a certainty that left me feeling cold. I tried to understand, but she wouldn't explain. I promised I wouldn't take her back, and that was all. We sat in silence for a long time. I tried to piece together what I'd missed, every look and gesture from the birthday playing back in my mind, and came up empty. What frightened me most was how blind I'd been. I had lived in that house, knew those people all my life, and still missed what my daughter saw in a few hours. I thought about the phone call, how desperate her voice had sounded, and I realized there must have been something I couldn't even imagine. It was the moment I began to question every memory I had of my family, and every assumption I'd made about safety and trust. There had been an entire lifetime before this that had led us here, a series of compromises and shifting balances that I'd ignored for too long. I'd been the oldest daughter, which in my family meant I was the one tested on, the one made to prove how things should work. I got my first job at 15, not because I wanted to help, but because I had no choice. My parents celebrated not my independence, but the extra money I brought home. I was told I was mature, that I was different from my sister, who never worked or contributed. My mother explained it by saying I was made for hard things, while my sister was too delicate. I kept quiet, not wanting to create problems, convincing myself that responsibility was a sign of strength. I planned for a future where my hard work would pay off. I got married young to a man who seemed gentle, the kind who called himself easygoing, but in reality was passive and distant. I took on a demanding job that paid well, worked long hours, managed our home while he stayed part-time, claiming he wanted to be there for Freya. It felt almost like a partnership at first, until the cracks showed. His frustration, his short temper, his tendency to snap over small things. The shift was slow, so slow I almost didn't notice it happening. His anger spread into our home, into our daughter's life. No one was ever hit, but the tension became unbearable. The yelling, the slammed doors, the threats just quiet enough to deny. The final breaking point came when he threw a bottle across the room. He insisted he didn't mean it, but Freya had been in the hallway. She flinched, dropped what she was holding, and I felt something in myself fracture. I didn't wait for it to escalate. I packed a bag and left with her. My parents took us in, but it was clear I was there as a burden, not as a daughter in need. I lost my job because I couldn't handle the hours and the legal battles at the same time. I settled for a job that paid little and offered even less dignity. I had once been the one supporting my family, sending money every month, paying for trips and repairs, always stepping in when needed. When the money stopped, the support from my parents grew cold. My mother sighed over groceries, my father brought up bills, and suddenly I was invisible in their lives. My sister and her children lived there for free, filling the house with chaos, but I was the one who felt out of place. Freya sensed it too. Her drawings disappeared from the fridge. Her plate was cleared before she finished. She became quieter, stayed close to me, started asking if we could move out soon. I told her it was temporary, that family meant helping each other. I tried to believe it. But everything changed with that phone call. Sitting in the car, I realized something had happened that I couldn't undo, something that shattered my last illusions about home and safety. The rest of the story was just beginning to unfold. After that day, everything I had ever believed about my family and my own judgment began to unravel. Sitting in the car with Freya, my mind was caught in a loop of confusion and dread. I kept searching for a logical explanation, but I found none. Freya's certainty about never returning to my parents' house was absolute. She didn't elaborate, and I couldn't bring myself to demand answers. I promised her we wouldn't go back, and that was all either of us could handle at that moment. We spent that night at my friend Chris's place. He didn't ask questions. He just opened the door and let us in. Freya and I shared his old sofa. She curled up next to me, too quiet for a child. I didn't sleep much, just stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how I'd failed to see the truth. The next morning, I forced myself to act like things were normal. I tried to make breakfast, helped Freya get ready for school, and walked her there, heart pounding with every step. My parents were waiting by the school gate. Their presence felt rehearsed, like they'd coordinated it for maximum impact. I told Freya to go inside and face them alone. There was no kindness, no apology, only accusations and disappointment. My mother complained that I'd disappeared with Freya, that they'd been worried. I told them what Freya had overheard in their house, how they'd discussed sending her back to her father, how they had even talked about framing me with planted drugs to manipulate custody. My mother denied it, claiming it was just talk, that I was overreacting. My father insisted they had always helped me. I realized then that I would never get an admission of guilt, never an apology that meant anything. Their loyalty wasn't to me or to Freya. It was to their own comfort and routines. My decision was clear. I had to cut ties. I told them we were done, that they would never see us again. That night, sitting in Chris's kitchen, I felt the exhaustion settle into my bones. Freya didn't say much, but she sat beside me, leaning against my arm in a silent show of trust. I didn't cry. I was too empty for that. I thought about everything I'd lost, my parents, the illusion of a family that would stand by me, the security I thought I'd rebuilt. What I hadn't lost was beside me, the only thing that truly mattered. I knew then that I would do whatever it took to protect Freya, even if it meant burning every bridge behind me. I didn't trust silence anymore. To me, silence meant something was building, something dangerous was waiting. Days passed, then weeks. My parents didn't call or text. No extended family reached out. Chris called it peace, but I called it a warning. I watched Freya for signs of trauma. She was sleeping better, eating more, drawing little comics about wolves and snakes. All her stories ended with the wolf winning and the cubs safe. I didn't ask what it meant, but I hoped it was her way of coping. Chris was steady, never asking when we'd leave, just making sure we had what we needed. He was good to Freya, treated her with patience and respect, never pressing her for answers. I finally got a job offer. It paid enough to survive, more than I'd expected after months of uncertainty. I locked myself in the bathroom and laughed until I cried, relief flooding through me in a way I hadn't felt for years. For a brief moment, I thought things might start to stabilize, but then I checked social media. There were photos of my parents and my ex-husband, Vincent, at the beach together, with my sister and her family. The caption boasted about family unity and how proud they were of Vincent as a father. It made sense then why my parents had gone quiet. They had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. 2 days later, Child Protective Services knocked on Chris's door. They said they had received a report claiming I was unstable, that I'd kidnapped Freya, that I was involving strange men in her life. I knew immediately who had reported me. They searched the apartment, asked questions, and found nothing. When they left, I was shaking. I locked myself in the bathroom and threw up, realizing just how far my parents were willing to go. My lawyer confirmed that my parents planned to testify for Vincent in the upcoming custody hearing. Their testimony could sway the judge, he said. They were close family, and their word would carry weight. I asked if I was going to lose Freya. He told me not if Freya spoke for herself. That night, I explained the situation to Freya as gently as I could. She didn't seem afraid. She said she was ready to tell the truth. The weeks leading up to court were filled with anxiety. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined losing my daughter, imagined her being sent back to a father who had frightened her, to a family that had betrayed us both. I prepared myself for the worst, forced myself to focus on the details, documents, receipts, timelines, anything that might help us. But underneath it all, I was scared in a way I had never been before. It wasn't just about losing custody. It was about losing the last piece of myself that still felt whole. When the court date arrived, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. Vincent was there, suited and ready, with my parents sitting behind him. My sister didn't even look at me. Freya sat by my side, quietly drawing in her notebook, her hands steady. Chris was in the back, a quiet presence, someone who had never tried to fix anything, only supported me when everything else fell apart. The first day in court was brutal. My parents spoke about me as if I were a stranger, describing me as unstable, emotional, too sensitive. My sister backed them up. Vincent was praised for being a calm and patient father. I sat there, barely breathing, listening to the people who raised me dismantle my life for the sake of convenience. I gripped my hand so tightly I left marks on my skin. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to do the right thing, trying to support my family, and wondered if any of it had ever mattered. The moment finally came for Freya to speak. She was steady, focused. She told the truth about Vincent's anger, about the threats and the fear, about how she had overheard her grandmother and aunt planning to get me in trouble. She said she didn't feel safe with her father or with my parents. There was silence in the room, the kind that follows something undeniable. For the first time, I felt a small surge of hope, like maybe the truth was finally loud enough to be heard. But the battle was far from over. I could see the calculation in Vincent's eyes, the disappointment in my parents. I knew they would not give up easily. I didn't know what would come next, only that I had to be ready for anything. The fight for my daughter was not just about legal documents or custody. It was about proving to myself and to the world that I could protect her, no matter what it cost me. The days following Freya's testimony felt like standing in the eye of a storm. I waited for the backlash, for some new trick or accusation from Vincent or my parents, For years, I had moved through life assuming that if I was diligent enough, forgiving enough, I could make a fractured family feel whole. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to the people who raised me turn their backs without hesitation, I finally saw how futile that hope had been. Their words, rehearsed and cold, kept playing back in my mind. I recognized their tone, detached, factual, without empathy. They weren't trying to help anyone but themselves. When the court recessed for the day, I watched Vincent approach my mother, their faces set and tense. Their voices didn't reach me, but I saw the argument escalate, Vincent's hand closing hard around my mother's wrist, my father stepping between them. That was the last time my parents stood by Vincent's side. They left the courthouse and never came back. Later, my lawyer told me they'd withdrawn their support, and that was enough to shift the entire case. My lawyer was relentless. He laid out all the financial records, money Vincent had hidden, vacations he'd bought for my parents, payments that explained their sudden loyalty to him. Every document was a nail in the story they'd tried to sell the court. I watched Vincent's composure crack as my lawyer connected each thread, making clear how easily loyalty could be bought and how quickly it disappeared when the money ran out. For years, I'd worried about seeming ungrateful or dramatic for noticing how transactional family could become. Now it was being dissected in public. It was humiliating, but it was honest. The judge listened without interruption, reviewing the records, asking for clarification only when needed. I saw, for the first time, a sliver of fairness in a process I'd feared for months. When the decision came, it was clear and final. I was awarded full custody of Freya. There would be no visitation for Vincent, no contact. He left the courtroom, face flushed with anger and embarrassment. My parents didn't even show up that day. Their silence, once something I read as peace, now felt like absence. After the ruling, I tried to let relief settle in, but my body wouldn't let me relax. I kept expecting another call, another surprise. Chris was the only one who seemed truly at ease, always reminding me that we were safe now, that the worst was over. I didn't believe it, not fully, but I wanted to. My parents disappeared from social media. The posts about family vacations and happy gatherings vanished, replaced with nothing. Their new car was gone. I heard from an old family friend that things were hard for them, that they had lost some friends and support after the truth came out. Meanwhile, Chris and I built a new kind of routine. I found real work again, enough to pay the bills and give Freya a little stability. Chris, always patient, never pressured me about the future. He treated Freya with gentle respect, letting her adjust in her own way. She started drawing again, new comics where the wolves always found their way home, always safe in the end. Sometimes I'd find her curled up in bed next to Chris, telling him stories about her wolves and the snakes they defeated. I realized then how much she trusted him. There was one morning, months after the hearing, when my parents showed up at the door with pancakes. They claimed they didn't understand what Vincent was really like and suggested we could move past everything. Before I could speak, Chris told them to leave. Freya peeked out from behind him, nodding, and my parents left. That was the last time I saw them. After that, it was just the three of us. I kept waiting for the grief to hit, for the full weight of everything I'd lost to come crashing down. Instead, I felt a kind of emptiness, like the absence of something I'd always thought was essential, but had never really belonged to me. I watched Freya find her own way back to happiness, saw her become steadier and braver. I learned to find contentment in smaller things. A job that didn't fill me with dread, evenings spent laughing at Chris's terrible jokes, the steady rhythm of days that didn't end in arguments or fear. The anger faded, replaced by a quieter determination to keep our lives safe and peaceful. I stopped worrying about the opinions of people who'd shown me who they truly were. My focus narrowed to what was in front of me, my daughter's safety, her laughter, the home we built together, even if it wasn't perfect or traditional. I accepted that some losses weren't really losses at all, just truths finally revealed. There were still difficult days. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if I could have done anything differently, if I'd missed some moment where things could have turned out better. But I never doubted the choice I made when I walked out that birthday, never doubted my decision to put Freya first. I understood now that family is not just blood, not just history. It's trust, it's action, it's choosing over and over again to stand up for what is right, even when it means standing alone. That knowledge didn't bring closure, but it brought peace, and that was enough. As weeks turned into months, I found myself relearning how to exist without the burden of waiting for disaster. Every day had its own quiet test, making sure Freya felt safe, holding myself together when old anxieties resurfaced, believing in the small reality we were building. There was no dramatic turning point, just a slow process of adjusting to an emptier life, one with fewer people but also fewer threats. I went through routines, taking comfort in their predictability, measuring progress in little things, Freya sleeping through the night, the slow return of her jokes, a kitchen filled with the normal sounds of morning. Work gave me something to anchor myself to, even if the job was not glamorous. Having an income, however modest, meant I could offer Freya stability without relying on anyone else. Chris remained a constant presence, never intruding but always there when we needed him. He found small ways to make things easier, like handling repairs or bringing home groceries. I watched him and Freya build their own connection, one based on mutual respect and patience, free of obligation. In many ways, they showed me what healthy attachment looked like: simple, reliable, honest. Social media became a minefield. Sometimes curiosity got the better of me, and I would check for any sign of my parents or Vincent. The accounts were mostly silent now. No more photos of family gatherings, no more celebrations. The narrative they had so carefully crafted had fallen apart, and their absence from my feed felt like a wound that refused to heal. Occasionally, mutual acquaintances would reach out, asking for my side of the story, wondering how things had fallen apart so quickly. I rarely answered. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been lived through and lost. I paid close attention to Freya's mood, searching for any trace of the trauma that had followed us. She asked fewer questions about her grandparents and father. Sometimes I caught her looking distant, lost in thought, but those moments grew less frequent. She focused on her art, channeling what she couldn't express into her drawings. Wolves, snakes, and dens, always ending in safety. I understood then that her resilience would carry her through just as mine had, though I wished she hadn't needed to be so strong so soon. Legal issues lingered in the background like a threat, but as time passed, the urgency faded. My parents never tried to contact us again. Vincent didn't reach out either. The silence was heavy at first, then liberating. I no longer had to justify my choices to anyone who had made it clear their loyalty was conditional. I no longer felt beholden to a family that saw me only as a means to an end. For the first time in my adult life, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't built on compromise and fear. Chris and I drifted closer together in ways I hadn't anticipated. After years of knowing each other as friends, we slipped into something deeper almost without realizing it. It was never rushed or forced. I found comfort in his steadiness, the way he listened without judgment, the way he made both me and Freya feel seen. There were nights we'd sit together after Freya was asleep, sharing quiet meals, talking about nothing important. It wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. Trust had become my most valuable currency, and I saw how much it mattered in every gesture he made. Freya noticed the shift before I did. She began including Chris in her routines, asking for his help with homework, sharing her comic strips with him, inviting him to join our little rituals. I saw the change in her, more relaxed, more willing to risk laughter. Watching them together, I realized how much damage had been done by years of uncertainty. I promised myself to never let that return, to guard our peace with everything I had left. One Saturday morning, my parents appeared at the door without warning, carrying a box of pancakes. They stood in the hallway making vague apologies, insisting they had misunderstood Vincent, that things had gotten out of control. I didn't react. Chris stepped between us, told them to leave. Freya stood behind him, silent but unafraid. When the door closed, I felt a strange calm. There would be no reconciliation, no return to old patterns. Whatever sense of family I had clung to was finally severed. News spread among distant relatives and old friends. Some cut ties with my parents, others stayed neutral. I didn't seek their approval or understanding. For years, I had poured myself into relationships that expected everything and gave little in return. Letting them go was not easy, but it was necessary. I focused on what remained: the quiet home, the slow return to trust, the small victories that marked real healing. I didn't mark the passage of time in big milestones anymore. I measured it in the way I could breathe again, in the mornings that started with peace instead of dread, in Freya's laughter echoing down the hall. Chris's presence grew more important, not as a replacement for what we'd lost, but as proof that chosen family could matter more than blood. I saw in him the possibility of a future built not on obligation, but on real, earned loyalty. The pain of betrayal never fully disappeared, but its power faded. I understood now that family could mean harm as well as comfort. I learned to protect what mattered, to defend my daughter's safety and my own dignity. The scars remained, but they became part of a larger story, one of survival, determination, and new beginnings. I knew the fight was not truly over, that life would bring new challenges, but for the first time in years, I trusted myself to face them. That was enough. Time moved forward whether I was ready or not. Life had a way of asserting itself through routine and necessity. Each morning, I got up before sunrise, made coffee, and prepared Freya's lunch. The mundane details of living became acts of reassurance, reminders that we were safe, that the world could be predictable again. Some days I still woke up with a start, half expecting to find a message from my parents or Vincent, something that would shatter the fragile normalcy I had created. But the phone stayed quiet. The past became a little more distant each week. Chris and I gradually formed the shape of a new family. It happened quietly, without declarations or grand gestures. He didn't try to fill spaces that weren't his to claim. He gave Freya space, respected my boundaries, let both of us come to him in our own time. Freya began to trust him more deeply, letting him help with school projects, telling him about her day, sometimes even laughing with him the way she once laughed with her cousins before everything changed. I watched their bond grow and realized how long it had been since I felt comfortable leaving her in someone else's care. Chris never pushed. He just showed up every day, the same steady presence. He was reliable in a way that soothed something raw inside me. My work became a refuge, not because I loved it, but because it offered control. It was something I could do well, something that made sense when so much else did not. I was careful with money, learned to stretch every dollar, gave up the idea of indulgence, and focused on what we needed most: security. There was satisfaction in knowing that each bill paid, each meal on the table was earned through my own effort. I stopped resenting the loss of my old life and accepted the reality I was building. There was dignity in survival. Freya's healing was less obvious, but I saw it in the details. She slept through the night without nightmares. Her comics shifted from stories of wolves battling snakes to quiet images of home and safety. She invited friends over for the first time since we'd left my parents' house. I paid close attention to her mood, always alert for signs of anxiety or fear, but she was steady, sometimes even joyful. She still asked about her grandparents from time to time, and I answered as honestly as I could without burdening her with more than she needed to carry. I saw her strength, her resilience, but I wished she'd never had to develop it so young. My parents became ghosts. Their absence left a mark, but not the wound I expected. Their lives unraveled quietly. Mutual acquaintances told me about their struggles, how friends drifted away, how finances became tight. I felt a distant sense of justice, but no satisfaction. Their choices had brought them here, just as mine had brought me to a different place. I stopped searching for closure, stopped wishing for apologies that would never come. I accepted that forgiveness was not something I owed them, nor something I needed to give in order to move on. Occasionally, guilt would creep in. I wondered if I had gone too far, if cutting them out completely was more punishment than protection. I questioned my decisions late at night, replayed old arguments, imagined other ways it could have gone. But every time I looked at Freya, saw her steady gaze, I knew I had made the right choice. My job was not to preserve old loyalties, but to safeguard her peace. The realization didn't erase the pain, but it quieted the doubt. Chris and I grew closer, but always on our own terms. There were no promises, just the slow accumulation of shared days. He became part of our family not because I needed him to fix anything, but because he made life easier, safer. Freya called him her pack, and I saw in that word a kind of truth that years of obligation had never produced. Trust built itself slowly, through small acts of kindness and consistency. For the first time, I believed in the possibility of happiness not dependent on anyone's approval. My world became smaller, but more honest. I let go of relationships that drained me, stopped trying to win back people who had chosen convenience over connection. My focus narrowed to the essentials: work, home, Freya's well-being, Chris's steady support. I found contentment in the quiet routines, in evenings spent together without fear, in laughter that didn't come at anyone's expense. I stopped measuring my life by what I'd lost and began valuing what I had built. The pain of betrayal lingered, sometimes sharper on lonely nights, but it lost its hold over me. I learned that family could mean many things, and that sometimes the hardest lesson is accepting when to let go. I wasn't healed, not completely, but I was moving forward. The future remained uncertain, but I faced it with a new sense of resolve. My strength was not in denying what had happened, but in surviving it, in building something real out of the ruins. That became enough. That had to be enough. A year passed before I truly understood what survival meant. There was no dramatic moment of triumph, no sudden transformation. Healing came quietly, through repetition and time. Each morning, I watched the light move across the kitchen table, heard Freya's footsteps in the hallway, felt Chris's presence as he brewed coffee before work. The world didn't give us a medal for what we'd been through, but every ordinary day felt like its own kind of reward. I learned to let go of expectations, to stop waiting for apologies that would never come, to accept the reality I'd chosen and the peace I'd earned. Freya adjusted better than I expected. She grew more confident, more independent. Her art changed again. She drew gardens, little houses, and animals curled together in safety. The nightmares faded. She began sleeping with her door open again, inviting the world back in. I saw the weight lift from her shoulders, little by little, and it gave me the strength to keep moving. I stopped searching her eyes for pain and started seeing hope. Chris became a fixture in our lives. What started as a friendship deepened naturally, not from loneliness or desperation, but from mutual respect. He never asked for anything in return, never made me feel like a burden. His kindness was consistent, patient, and without strings. Freya started calling him family in her own quiet way, including him in our rituals, sharing her victories and disappointments. I realized I'd stopped thinking of him as temporary. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, I saw our life together for what it was. Not perfect, not without scars, but honest and stronger for everything we'd endured. My parents never reached out again. I learned through others that they had lost much: friendships, financial stability, even their sense of place in the family. They became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when loyalty is traded for convenience. I felt pity sometimes, but never enough to open that door again. The idea of forgiveness faded, replaced by understanding. I accepted that some people were not capable of change, that their absence was less a wound than a relief. The wider world moved on without us. Distant relatives picked sides, some reaching out, others fading away. I realized how little any of it mattered. I no longer needed approval or validation. The opinions of people who had stood silent while my life was coming apart lost all power over me. I drew boundaries and kept them. I let go of the need to explain myself. Work became less about survival and more about possibility. I took pride in what I could provide for Freya. Our life was simple, not flashy, but it was stable and real. We celebrated small victories, a new school project, a day without worry, a quiet evening spent together. Chris's support never wavered. Over time, his presence shifted from comfort to necessity, not because I needed someone to rescue me, but because he respected the space I'd made for myself and Freya. I never stopped missing the idea of family, but I stopped grieving what I'd lost. In its place, I built something new, a home defined by honesty and safety, not by obligation or fear. I learned that family is not just blood, it's loyalty, choice, and daily acts of care. I chose my people and they chose me back, and that was enough. Some days, when old doubts crept in, I reminded myself of what we'd survived. I measured progress by the absence of dread, by the presence of laughter, by the freedom to rest. The world wasn't perfect, but it no longer frightened me. I stopped looking over my shoulder. I moved forward, step by step, trusting myself to protect what I'd rebuilt. If there's any lesson to offer, it's this. Peace is not given, it's fought for. Trust is built, not assumed. And happiness, when it comes, is always quieter than you expect. I fought for my daughter, for myself, for a life that no longer depended on the approval of those who never truly saw me. I lost a family, but I found my strength, and in the end, I gained a kind of freedom I'd never known before. That's the story I choose to carry forward.